Hello and welcome to another episode of FireDEV, a fireside chat with great people in the industry. Today I have a developer with me. I have Dominik Kiersz. Is that how you pronounce it, or have I butchered it?
Every single person tries and butchers it. It's actually Kiersz, but I wouldn't blame you for
How
not
is it?
pronouncing it correctly.
Is it Kiersz?
Kiersz.
Kiersz.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's okay.
I'll call you Dominic or Dom.
Call me Dom. It's
Yeah.
fine. That's what everyone calls me.
That's fine. Yeah, so I appreciate you coming onto the podcast today. How are you?
I'm feeling great. Thank you. Very productive day, and I'm thrilled to be here. Hopefully, to entertain your listeners for an hour or so.
I'm sure you will. So you work at ASOS. What do you do there?
So at ASOS, I am a junior platform engineer or an associate platform engineer, depending on your terminology. I've been there for about a year. And as a platform engineer, my main focus is to maintain infrastructure, but also implement DevOps processes to support developers um, with with tooling, things like CI/CD and infrastructure as code. Uh, my main responsibilities aren't really to develop the software, but to support the platform, the microservices platform that a lot of companies have been implementing right now.
Okay. So, how would you explain DevOps to? Because I've had a few people ask me this. They've said, we see DevOps roles and they're developer roles, but they're just a bit confused of what DevOps does. And how would you explain DevOps, engineers compared to, let's say, a front end, back end developer, in relation to something like that? Because sometimes they can kind of sound similar, and sometimes they don't. So how would you, explain it in your words?
So, in my words, I don't have much experience of web development, but in order to understand what DevOps is and what it comes from, we have to go back. Essentially, back in the day, you had siloed operations. You got your system administrators that will work on your servers where your application would lie. So, be it your web servers, application, and your databases. You would also have separate database administrators. And then you would also have your developers, right, on the other side of the spectrum. But to avoid the entire history, explain the entire history here, essentially what would happen is those two silos would not communicate with one another. So developers would develop the code, and ops engineers, again, infrastructure and all of those system administrators would not know what the software is. And that would cause long releases and a lot of problems during the release process. So what happened with this is essentially there was this theory proposed a while back, 10, 15 years or so ago. I don't remember the source for it, to unify those operations. So you got your DevOps culture that goes right from testing to integration to deployment and then monitoring of the software and going back again. That's why you would see the DevOps symbol being an infinity sign, because you got this symbol and the culture. So DevOps in itself isn't a role, as a purist might say, but is a culture under which developers operate at. And in order to do that, you essentially need people like platform engineers and DevOps engineers to support the infrastructure to allow and facilitate this DevOps culture to happen. So there are no silos, everyone communicates, there is an agile process in place.
Okay,
Just
so it's
that answer,
basic.
more or less.
Yeah. Okay, so it's basically you're taking it. I wouldn't say to finish, but from start to finish and all intermediary stages. You're at different parts of the process. So obviously ASOS is big. I'm sure that every engineer isn't just a DevOps engineer. I'm sure they have other engineers like microservice engineers. They have probably cloud engineers. They have front end, back end, full stack. So
Yes.
what would be this distinction between a DevOps engineer that does a lot more compared to let's say just a front end guy that's just working on the the user interface of the website, what would be the distinction between what the two would be doing and focusing on, and where's the overlap?
So I think this will be very much best described with an example. If you have a front-end developer and they're working on the front end of a website or the application itself, then they would be focusing on the substance that then gets deployed. DevOps engineer or a platform engineer, because those two roles very much overlap, they DevOps engineers will take that package and ensure that it has a unit testing run. It will ensure that it is packaged correctly and that we can deploy it automatically onto a server. So that again, there is this process of continuous integration, continuous delivery. And that's the distinction. It's to enable faster development of whatever front-end engineer or a back-end engineer might work on.
Okay, so DevOps don't really replace other engineers; they aid their process. So there's the smoothest transition of what they've just created versus what was there before to make it as smooth as possible. So you're basically that glue in between, effectively.
Yes, that's one way to describe it. There are, again, subtle differences between roles like DevOps engineers and platform engineers and SREs, even as site reliability engineers. But essentially, you want to maximize efficiency. You want to enable those agile processes to continue. Right? So, for example, I support data engineers in the usual line of work. They would be writing SQL queries and scripts and ad hoc scripts that then, say, act on databases, or in our example would be an Azure Synapse solution that contains many databases. And essentially, my job would be to take those scripts, make sure that they're pipelined correctly, and that they're executed. That you got things like dealing with firewalls, where you don't want you want those scripts to be executed on the databases, and there's a lot of other components that we want to automate for them, essentially.
Okay, so just going back a little bit, you did a very interesting and cool sounding degree, but it's different to what you're doing now. So how did that transition occur, and like why?
Gosh, that's an entire story on its own. So my background is that of astrophysics, astronomy and astrophysics. I've graduated with a master's degree from University of Kent in England back in 2019. Gosh, where do I begin with that?
Go for it wherever you want to.
Wherever I want to. Essentially, as a kid, I was fascinated with the space shuttle and a lot of space mission, what are the space applications, and why should we be excited about, right? So essentially, I've decided to let's do an astrophysics degree. I'm really fascinated with this stuff. And so I did, and I'm skipping a lot of details and intentions and whatnot. But at the end of that, after writing my master's thesis, I then went on to onto research at Queen's University Belfast to work as an observational astronomer. Halfway through that research period, and essentially trying to get a PhD, I've decided that what I enjoy more is to facilitate other scientists or engineers to do their job. I always had this passion for infrastructure and sticking things together, essentially, like you mentioned when we talked about DevOps. So that kind of support role, among with other reasons why I haven't departed from academia, was the reason I essentially found this role through a governmental program, you could say, for employment, and I essentially transitioned into being a platform engineer. Again, I'm skipping a ton of details. Happy to talk about them, but yeah, that's more or less the high level story.
Okay. Do you ever feel like going back and or switching and doing something more in line with your degree? Because it sounds like you've got a huge passion for that, and you've had passion for that probably longer than programming since you was a child. Do you ever feel like trying to get into that, or maybe using the engineering skills that you have and going into something like astrophysics, or working on rockets or something? Because it's all computers. It needs to be programmed, so it's not like you have to, do just physics alone.
No, absolutely right. And actually, I do have a story about this. What you just mentioned, this lack of, rather the involvement of programming in physics. So to answer your first question, um, at this point of time, not necessarily. I am still fairly early career into the tech industry. I would like to gather enough experience and see what tech has to offer. So far, I'm very much enjoying my role. Whether I see myself supporting scientists in the future, I'm somewhat. I would say yes. I think I would like to try that if at all possible. Um, but certainly that's not a short term thing. It will take years, I think, for me to do that. As for involvement of coding and physics, my adventure with tech started at about third year of university when I had a brief internship at Bay Systems in Bristol, where I worked as an AI engineer for the first time. And um, a year prior to that, I've tried to apply for a ton of internships just to gather experience. Right? That's what you do during uni. You try to gather experience for your employment later down the line. And every single last one of them at the beginning told me, well, you cannot code. So, used to us, essentially. That's the high level overview of that. So then started to look into things like Linux scripting in Bash, Python. I started to pick up a number of tools, SQL as well, to kind of just to have a basic skill set, and worked on mini projects and things like that. Um, and about a year later, then I've managed to land this internship at BAE, where I've worked as an AI engineer. So I do voice the fact that there is a huge need for more physics, so programming and development education in physics degrees.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely imagine that. I was, I came across someone recently because I decided to do tutoring, and I was do one of the things I do is computer science tutoring, and they needed some help with computer science, use C++, and I asked what degree they was doing, and I thought they were gonna say something like computer science because it was pretty hardcore regular C++, and it turned out they was doing some sort of physics degree. I can't remember the exact type, but it was some sort of physics degree they was doing. And but the person didn't expect to be doing it, and I think not only does there need to be more exposure to it in these science degrees, because there's a lot of systems that and jobs that do require coding or scripting or something along those lines. There needs to be this sort of understanding that that is what you're going to do, because people get into it and they're like, oh, you have to code, and they just think that, oh, that's a computer science degree, or something along those lines. It's not going to be in some sort of physics degree. So yeah, there definitely does need to be more of an overlap, and a better understanding, and teaching it as well, because at the end of the day, when you're in college, there, as far as I'm aware, there definitely wasn't when I was there. There were no programming in the science degrees, not of any major amount. So you'll go through all of that. You'll have people that do computer science or some sort of IT degree. They'll learn coding, and then when they go and do coding at university, then they'll feel more comfortable with it. But then the ones that do science, like physics, for example, and go and do some sort of physics degree, they'll just find it so alien.
Certainly true. Again, this is huge generalization. There does need to be more exposure. So I'm in the UK, and I had the privilege of demonstrating and being an assistant lecturer when I was still at Queen's University Belfast. So what I did notice is that a lot of degrees across the country, and physics at Queen's University Belfast started to introduce pretty much mandatory classes for programming, one of which I helped to deliver. But this is so there is a transformation happening, and those skill sets, look, majority of people will end up in industry. There's just not enough academic jobs out there to to have everyone uh, doing theoretical physics or observational astronomy for that matter. So yeah.
Yeah. Plus, also, not everyone, I guess, will want to, go into theoretical physics as well. Let's say if they have coding, there's so many other opportunities out there. They might want to go into some of those other areas, and the pay for some of those other. Again, I don't know exactly what a theoretical physicist, gets these days in terms of pay, but I know there's roles in the IT sector where, especially if you go contract and you've been doing it for a while, you can charge a fair bit, and it's going to be hard to compete against.
So yeah, I do second that. Based on the salaries, at least, that I managed to encounter, the end game in academia, or if you become, say, a professor in astrophysics, right, the end game is amazing. So a professor might be an equivalent to, say, a principal engineer,
Yeah,
but the end game is amazing. Anything before that, you're talking about postdocs. So postdoctoral researchers, you got your PhD and you're basically doing short-term contracts in a very unstable job, in a unstable manner, and you earning essentially less than a junior, say, DevOps engineer
yeah.
would. So there is a stark difference, and again, a lot of people chasing that end game, but a lot of people might just want to settle in for going into industry and get better benefits, better everything for that matter.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's always the case when you know, you're really going into the private sector and just going and working for, obviously not Google necessarily, but a company that has you know more money and also is making stuff that's going to directly make the money. Because when you're, let's say doing theoretical, physics, it might be important work, but doing well in that doesn't mean that the organization that has you doing the work is going to, sell more of something. It's like, whereas you can go and work for ASOS, for example, and putting some sort of procedure in place, or creating some sort of, let's say if you're optimizing the application, and let's say if you knock it down by zero point 0.1 second load time, that could result in an extra multiple millions a year or month even. And as a result, ASOS is willing to pay, or these companies are willing to pay good salaries because they know that they could get millions return for somebody that they're paying 50 or 100,000 for, which is obviously on the higher end. Whereas academia, they're not getting that sort of return.
It depends how you quantify return, right? Yeah, money wise,
Yeah,
and
money wise, yeah, because
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
because obviously if you've got money coming in, it's a lot easier to spend it. Like give it out to employees. But if you don't have money coming in directly from the activities of the employees, then it's a lot harder to say, okay, I'll pay the employees more.
Yeah, no, you've mentioned losses as well. I agree. You've mentioned losses due to downtime. Something that platform and DevOps engineers do try to do is to prevent those downtimes and
Mm,
release faster and more often. And certainly when it comes to the big sales and say Black Friday or
exactly.
your January sales, that any downtime, it's going to cost you and it's going to hurt. In academia, that return, it's not necessarily monetary, but here lies the problem. How do you sell it to the public? Why is it useful? Why should we care? Um, One of the big reasons I also departed was, the, how do we justify to the public we are building huge telescopes? That's
Yeah.
fine, but we could build 40 hospitals for the price of one quite easily.
Yeah.
Now,
See.
no,
Mm,
not to say that it is not important or interesting or fascinating. There is certainly a lot of inspiration to be gained out of it. And in the topic I've researched, which was planetary defense, protecting the Earth from asteroids like Armageddon would in some respects, but in a much smaller scale, there was certainly some benefit, long-term benefits from it. But just
Oh yeah, for sure. And because, like you were saying, it's a lot of time like taxpayers' money, for example, and for you to say, okay, I'm going to spend, I don't know, 10 million, or however much it is, let's say 10 million on doing this project, and like you said, they might say, oh, you can build X amount of hospitals, X amount of schools, fix the roads, put it towards this or that. It's a lot different. Whereas when it's private enterprise, they're making money from sales, and obviously what they do with that money, people are less concerned. Obviously you can still make an argument that they have a social responsibility to make
yeah,
sure that the community that they are making the money within is looked after, and they progress that community as much as possible, and that might be through medical research or building hospitals. But it's because you're not directly taking money from a consumer without them giving it you, because obviously like with tax, yeah, you give it, but it's like, I don't want to give it. Whereas when you go and buy something, let's say on ASOS, there's more of like an kind of an even exchange, or at least that's how a consumer will think of it. So yeah, obviously there needs to be more of a, not education necessarily, but sort of discussion and openness with the public about this research is important, this is what it can do for society, for you, for your kids, and this is the benefit of it.
Yes, I agree. I think I mostly agree with the idea of tangible exchange, and a lot of arguments could be made that companies are just stoking up profits and they're not doing much for the society. That is something that is to be considered. You also mentioned responsibility to the society. One thing that crosses my mind, things like sustainability, right? We companies do want, or at least are trying to certain degree, become more sustainable towards the environment. So there is that aspect of responsibility. As for academia, um, it is specialist in some cases, and obviously there is a lot of research that is beneficial. To take it during the I can't comment much on life sciences since I'm not a life scientist, but uh, development of the vaccines during COVID-19. That's something that one could say tangibly, well, that was a benefit to the society. So I think there should be more open discussions, as you say, more open discussions about where is that money going, and perhaps more philosophical questions, whether we should be studying, say, trans-Neptunian objects, beyond the Pluto's orbit, right? And is that going to necessarily benefit anyone at this point of time, especially with the cost of living crises, fuel cost increases, etc.? A lot of the arguments could be made for companies as well. ASOS sells fashion and its luxury products, but I think it's about the openness of those discussions.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was just thinking now. What do you think of the idea of, let's say, all the money that's going to go to research projects? If, let's say, the government and these institutions were to say to the taxpayers that 20% of it you will get to choose the research process. So not all of it, just in case the decisions they make are pretty stupid. But let's say 20% of it, you get to choose the research projects that it goes to. Let's say they were gonna, distribute it amongst 5 research projects. Just for argument's sake, let's say each one's 4 million. So just to keep the example simple, and we do a vote, and you get to choose the research project it goes to. So that way you feel like you have more of an active, involvement, because there might be a research project for rocket based stuff, and somebody might say, I don't mind
Yeah.
research based projects, I just don't like or don't think it's necessary for this. But if it's more, let's say, looking into cancer, I support this, or maybe the other way around. What do you think of something like that?
So on paper, democracy will be amazing, right? Like Switzerland, they got constant referendums over their policy and spending. As for research funding and direct projects, this is very much complicated, right? Because the funding usually comes from funding agencies. In the UK, it is the UK Research Institute, and you got a number of other bodies as well, STFC, Science Technology Facilities Council, um, just to name one. And that money is usually granted from the government. How these bodies then deliver that money to the researchers is based on competitive grants, right? So you will apply for a grant, the scientist would explain, right, this is what my research will do, that's how it's going to benefit, and then the money is being distributed via those bodies, supported by the taxpayers' money. At least that's my high-level understanding of it. There are tiny details, always some tiny details in between. Same goes for things like space projects. Usually, at least in Europe, it goes usually for ESA, and that's funded by the governments. So every year there is like a council meeting essentially, and what space missions, we're going to be funding. So the concept of what missions should be prioritized, what research should be prioritized as a society, as ideal it would be that we get to vote on all of it, I don't think in practice that would work, granted the complexity of it. And usually it's a tough one, right? Because democracy, at least in the Western society, is seen as a good thing. But how do we implement this on a larger scale? And that's where I'm very, very skeptical on the matter.
Yeah, I mean, of course, and that's the reason I was saying, like 20% or maybe less or maybe more. There's something that's not so much that if, let's say, the wrong decisions are made, or there's a bit of problems with that. There's still most of the research, funds are still being used as normal, and then depending on how that goes, it could be you go up or down or just stopped entirely. But again, yeah, it's one of those things. It's a difficult one, and to get people interested, and it might even have the opposite effect where you give them a selection, and somebody might say, "I think all of them are useless and rubbish. I don't want any more money to go to it." Whereas right now, people might not even think about the money that's going towards research projects that they're paying in tax. They might just think about the money that's going towards, let's say, NHS, or for roads, or for the military. Those sort of stuff might be the main focus of it, and as a result, the research just keeps ticking on just because they just don't actively know about it, and as a result, they don't have any resistance. So yeah, you got to make sure you don't try and involve them, and it has the opposite, intended effect. So
Yeah.
you was talking that before, you briefly mentioned Black Friday. So a retailer
Yeah.
like ASOS, has crazy periods like Christmas, Black Friday. How were those periods? Christmas and Black Friday, and were there any technical issues that occurred? And on top of that, another question: what does ASOS do leading up to one of those events when there's going to be a huge influx of users and sales, and obviously returns afterwards? They must, I'm assuming, do something in preparation on the technical side.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a huge period that we would call peak, and every team usually gets assigned, in theory, every team gets assigned the fair share of goals and tasks to accomplish. My specific team was not involved in the um, say the web server side of things. There are specific web teams that that try to keep things afloat. And from what I know, there's a lot of testing around, being able to scale your clusters, your Kubernetes clusters correctly, stress testing, things like that. So again, it's hard to comment since I'm not directly involved with this. However, what I can comment is on my end, specifically, our team was tasked to help out with increasing our scope of monitoring. So months in advance of peak, usually we would be assigned tickets and some stories to help improve our infrastructure, to say have more coverage where our virtual machines would go down, or or whether the storage is overfilling, things like that. We do months in advance. So yeah, essentially, there's a huge preparation period, right? Stress testing, making sure that everything is in place. As I said, my team was not necessarily involved in the heat of it, but a lot of things are happening.
Okay.
I miss
Fair.
anything?
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's sounds good. So, what sort of technology stack does ASOS use?
So primarily, we were back then one of the biggest users of Microsoft Azure. So everything on cloud these days. So most of our technologies are from Microsoft. On the end of data services, which is the domain I operate in, we primarily use Azure Synapse, which is basically a um, scaled data store for your structured data. Azure Data Factory, which essentially acts as your ingest point from places like Data Lake. So Data Lake is just a lot of unstructured data that we want to filter out, put them into nice tables, and send them off to um, what we will call a data mart, which then the analysts can do all of their work with machine learning and whatnot. So we my domain and team essentially acts as the intermediate between the ingest from the website, what the customers order, for example, again generic examples here, um, right up to clear data for machine learning engineers, AI engineers, etc. So in terms, again, continuing on the stack, you got Azure products, primarily SQL as well. I don't use a lot of it in terms of specific tooling and technologies. So Azure DevOps with Azure pipelines, that's where we do most of our CI/CD work, and Bicep for our infrastructure as code. Um, yep, it all just kind of unites into um, a platform essentially.
Okay. So, I don't know why, but I get the vibe that ASOS is a chill company to work for. What is it like to work there firsthand? Again, I have no basis on this, but just for some reason, I don't get sort of crazy crunch, code code vibes, or just toxic environment vibes. But again, what's it like to work there? Is it just normal? Is it better? Is it worse?
If it's not a release, and that's a big asterisk. So when we release code, things can go wrong, and it can get stressful, nervous, so to say. And we've mentioned peak before. That's when the crunch really is. So it does happen. I don't think any IT industry is immune from it. Um, as for the general vibe, so ASOS does pride itself being a destination for 20 somethings, fashion destination for 20 somethings, but I've managed to recite that without butchering it. um, but that vibe does somewhat translate onto the IT side of things. So in terms of our operational culture, it is about being able to fail safely. A lot of psychological safety is involved in this. From my perspective, I certainly feel I'm allowed to fail and make those mistakes, and they do happen. Even to the best of us, every single person does fail eventually. If you mentioned it being chill, there are deadlines. It's not to be misleading. There are things to do on time, and you have to put your head down and do it. Having said that, I do think that there is the right level of pressure for somebody new coming in and picking up. Um, the rate they feel comfortable, but slightly outside of the comfort zone in order to continue to learn and progress. I think that's the message here: is that there is no flat line of expectation at the very beginning. You grow at your own rate, and become become a better engineer with time.
Okay, fair enough. So they, allow you to grow. They sound like understanding, but obviously there's, deadlines and goals to achieve.
It again, it's not to say that any of us are lazy, so to say. IT is still a stressful field, like any other domain at ASOS. But from my perspective, there is more room to maneuver, and there is more of a focus on personal development. So I always have some level of time to learn a new skill, be it learning Ansible, be it picking up Kubernetes, or at least the basics of it. There is that kind of culture where you are trying to grow, and I do appreciate it. I do appreciate it. There is room to maneuver. Yeah,
Okay.
not without deadlines.
Why ASOS? Obviously, you went from the astrophysics side of things, but like then why ASOS? And then on top of that, why a retailer?
So, ASOS specifically, like, how I managed to arrive at ASOS was, I don't want to say a coincidence because I do love working there. Having said that, I've arrived from this governmental program, right? So ASOS was expanding to Northern Ireland specifically. They're building the new Belfast office. It has reached the news and it's brilliant. But one of the ways they promoted themselves, and quite efficiently, I would say, uh, was in collaboration with the local government here, with the Department of Economy for Northern Ireland, and they developed this Assured Skills Academy thing, um, which essentially was 10 weeks of training, and you may have it, you get a guaranteed interview, and you may succeed or you may not, and that's okay, but you get that chance. So I've jumped on it somewhat opportunistically, and I have to admit that. Um, but I definitely stayed on for what ASOS is. Why retailer? If I was to pick one reason for it, I think it would be due to the fact you get to pick up a little bit of everything, right? You mentioned peak, sorry, Black Friday. We call it peak. It's just terminology. In the end, um, you've got to be quite adaptable in a way that uh, you learning new tools. You're always trying to release new features and new enhancements to your platform. And I think there's something unique about retailers in that sense that there is always a need to grow, to expand, to try something new, and fail quick and fail far, uh, fail quick and recover fast mentality. So I think retailers do a quite good job of it. Although, disclaimer, I'm still too early to say. And if I worked in another industry, like I've mentioned that internship back at BAE, that might be a different. That might be a lot of the same. Sorry.
Okay. And how does your salary at ASOS compare to other companies? Because I'm sure you must have looked at other companies. You must have seen their salaries. How does ASOS compare?
Uh, I would say so. This is a tough one. Right? Confidentiality is something I have to obey,
Of course.
especially with those kinds of public podcasts. So for my level, and I can again only comment on my level, uh, quite favorably, I would say. Actually, here's a bit of an anecdote. When ASOS was initially set up, we were promised one salary, but ASOS then looked at the market and said, "Hold on a second, maybe that should be a little bit higher to match what we would expect at this particular level." And so they did. And I ended up with a slightly higher salary than at the start of this Assured Skills Academy. So I would say favorably. Um, is it better than other industries? I couldn't tell you. A lot of jobs these days will say competitive salary. From what I gathered and speaking to friends that do work in industry as well, yeah, favorably, but maybe not the highest. But you do get that kind of trade off at times for the culture and whatnot. So it's about picking your priorities.
Okay. And On LinkedIn, I see a lot of women working at ASOS, including engineers. It seems, I don't know, for me, when I was, searching for people to get onto the podcast from ASOS, it just seemed overwhelmingly female, and kind of more than the industry average for like technical roles. Is that actually the case, or is that just what I was just happened to see on LinkedIn?
Good question. From the statistics that were shown publicly, at certain ASOS events, from what I recall, at least last October, at least in the Northern Irish Tech Hub, we do have a significant proportion of women working. So that would be true. How it compares against the rest of the company, because we do work quite close with the folks in London. So that's not something I'm able to comment on, unfortunately. But you do see a lot of women in technical roles and some very excellent engineers among those ranks. So
Yeah, it's just because ASOS. I don't know the statistics of how many women versus men are buying on ASOS, but I just feel like ASOS is attracts more women in terms of the end consumer. And just from what I just a little bit saw on LinkedIn, I thought maybe the female engine, the engineers that are female, they're like, oh, ASOS. That's kind of something I know about. I'm interested in. I work there instead of this other generic company that's just does other IT stuff. But again, obviously, that was just knowledge.
So
So
yeah, I want to just add a comment really about that side of engineering. I'm not sure if what you're saying is true. However, what I can say for certain is that the environment is more welcoming. In my team, we got a couple of women who have joined with me through that Shared Skills Academy, and I think if if what you're saying is true, it might also be due to the fact there is that attitude of growth, and um, if you're allowed to fail, say you post a PR and it just isn't up to scratch, right? You're not going to get instantly rejected. You will get some feedback on it. So, like you hope you would, right? With PRs. And I personally haven't seen the difference between PRs submitted by women or PRs submitted by men. The feedback is there. There is that process in place. That's just from my experience on a limited domain. So I cannot comment for the whole company, obviously.
okay, fair enough. And is your job remote or on site? And how is the overall ethos of ASOS towards remote working?
So this is a good one. Our site lead would refer to it as a trust-based system. I choose to work remotely, and like a lot of IT professionals these days, I choose to work remotely. I got good reasons for it. Say better screens, for example, right? I do enjoy, you know, set having a good setup at home for gaming or things like that. So I do enjoy being at home, and it's, for me at least after the COVID era, easier to just switch off at home. Having said that, the general ethos is do what's the right thing. At least in the Northern Irish Tech Hub, it's about doing the right thing. If you think you're doing better at home 5 days a week, so be it. If you think you want to go to the office every week, so be it. If you want to do anything between, so be it. So there is that trust-based system. It seems to work fine. As far as I'm concerned, every team is, given my role, I do see what other teams are usually doing and what they're contributing to the platform. So it clearly is effective, and it's bringing in a lot of talent. People are leaving other companies because of that, very flexible nature at ASOS.
Okay. So I noticed on your LinkedIn you are Microsoft certified. What does that specifically mean, and how do you go about being, getting Microsoft certified?
So, funny you mentioned that. Yeah, I do have a couple of just basic certifications which I managed to acquire through the Assured Skills Academy. I'm actually revising for a couple of more exams in the next couple of months. So, what I would say is do your practice. Obviously, a lot getting Microsoft certified is usually involves just taking an exam. You have to get 70% to pass. So with Microsoft certifications, although there is no lab requirement, like in some other certifications, say a Red Hat engineer certification, which requires you to do a lot of labs, which I don't yet have, but would be great. Um, my advice for getting those certifications would be learn the material, but also do your labs and do the practical side of things. So some of the exams I'm currently studying for, which is the system administrator, well, Azure administrator, and the DevOps one, um, do have the opportunity to say go on your cloud provider, be it AWS or Azure or Linode, whatever you want to use, and practice. Try to set up those users, set up a storage account, deploy a virtual machine. Um, Recently, for example, use some of those skills. Let's just set up some gaming servers for my friends. Let's administrate them on cloud because that's what I do on a daily basis. So I say practice, practice, practice. Certainly look at any questions, practice things like Udemy or other
Okay.
providers together. So.
What advice would you give to someone that's looking to start their own online retailer just from your experience at ASOS? I know, you obviously haven't started your own retailer, but being exposed to an online retailer like that, what advice would you give?
Um, that's a good question. So you're asking me what I would give in terms of um, how would somebody start your own shop, essentially, just to be clear.
Okay. And what improvements and changes would you like to make to, let's say, ASOS on a technical level if you had that opportunity?
ASOS. Again, it's a tough one. I would happily comment. I can only comment on um, my the domain I work in, which is data services. Um, there's always some improvement, right? Especially if you're a platform engineer, you always see 10 different things that you want to do better, more efficiently. I think speeding up releases, automating more. Um, that's what I would like to see from that DevOps perspective, where you want things to be faster. If we have a release every 2 weeks, why not 1 week? Why not five? Uh, why not 5 days, 4 days? Why not daily? Right. So you want to get that automated, and I guess again from that infrastructure perspective, um, this is certainly more in time investment in things like infrastructure as code. We've made some fantastic progress with it in my platform engineering team. But there is always something more to do as we develop new platforms and new solutions. So faster, more in source is better, and more automation.
Okay. And how has an ASOS's announcement of same day delivery affected the technical side of ASOS?
Oh, that's a good one. So same day delivery. Yeah, there have been problems because it's not the domain I usually work with. However, I don't think we've seen any. Again, not financial news here or anything on that side. I haven't heard of any particular impact that it had, um, and that's all I'm able to say.
Okay, fair enough. And ASOS, and I know this from personal experience, with not personal, but because my wife orders a lot of stuff from ASOS, so I've seen it firsthand. ASOS has a very good return policy compared to other retailers. Because some other retailers, their return policy is so bad, but ASOS is really good. How does this impact the technical side? Is it a logistics, nightmare? And like, do you get a lot of returns? How I feel like they would based on their returns policy.
So returns are usually handled by a complete different domain, supply tech, I believe. Having said that, obviously we get a lot of data coming in into ASOS, and especially my domain, we try to process a lot of that data. So I would imagine, at least from that analyst perspective, um, that so to a data analyst rather, um, that's not necessarily a bad thing because you get data coming in about returns. You can try to optimize your sales strategy. So I think there is something good about that, perhaps. Um, as for returns and logistics, that's very, very much outside my domain in terms of warehousing. And so ASOS has a lot of warehouses around Europe, um, but they seem to function well and be automated. Um, and we obviously get that data at data services. Um, so to us, it's not noticeable. To the domain I work in, it is not noticeable. We just handle it like any more data coming in from data lake.
Okay. And what do you think of VR and AR in fashion?
VR and I'm sorry.
VR, virtual reality, and
Yeah,
AR, augmented reality in fashion. And is ASOS doing anything, in those areas?
I haven't heard, but I'm not sure if we're gonna see an ASOS sale in metaverse anytime soon. Especially after some of the metaverse failures. I'm alright to say that metaverse didn't do particularly well. I'm not up to date with what's going on with metaverse, but apparently that has been a bit of a flop, to my knowledge at least. So I'm not sure whether ASOS will be selling virtual clothing or anything like that anytime soon.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was talking less about virtual clothing and obviously inevitably NFTs and more, the ability to, let's say, put on some sort of headset
Mhm.
and, envision or, let's say, using augmented reality, look at someone and then see how that clothes look at them before they physically order it. Or let's say you put the glasses on. Let's say it's just some sort of, let's say, Snapchat style spectacles or, Google Glass. You look at yourself in the mirror and maybe you have to wear some generic, gray or white or green clothing. But on top of that, you see the item of clothing that you want to buy. You can look at it in the mirror, and you can say, "Okay, this looks quite nice. I'll order it." I was thinking at more of those lines.
Sure. So I don't know about any developments in that area. Finally click what you're talking about with that. Yeah, that sounds like an amazing idea and something that maybe we should be investing in. Um, if there is work being developed, I don't know, and if I did, I'm not sure if I'm able to say anything like this. That's certainly with development stage of it. So
Okay, what upcoming technologies do you see changing online fashion retailers?
common technology, Saga.
Upcoming. I said sorry.
Common,
Upcoming as in like technologies that are
upcoming.
coming out soon or that are growing. Obviously NFT and blockchain and crypto are like examples of that. But again, if there's something else that you can think of that you can see change in online fashion retailers.
Um, Perhaps rise of AI. Maybe that's something. It's not an area I directly work with, but rise of AI. We all heard about ChatGPT. We've heard about artists protesting over things over generation like Mid Journey. image generation like Midjourney and others. So I see a lot of the work that might be done by models, say, being replaced by such technologies at some point. Say if you had a virtual character or a set of characters wearing a specific set of clothes, right? That could be something AI generated, because why not? Obviously, that raises a lot of ethical questions and whatnot, and what is art, but that's not something I'm going to get into. As for things like ChatGPT and linguistic models, perhaps they will influence product descriptions, data collection, whatever you name it. I think a lot of it could be augmented by AI, but it's hard to say on that specific on that product side of things whether
Okay.
that would change.
Is ASOS looking at blockchain, NFTs, and crypto? And what do you think of it for the retail industry?
Not something I know. If they do, it's again completely not my area. However, as for blockchain and NFT, there has been a major crash from what I know.
Hmm.
Um, um, don't work with blockchain, and I wouldn't immediately tell you what blockchain is all about. Having said it, I, I say there's going to be time and place for it. Right? There are banking apps these days, Monzo, Revolut, that are dabbling in it. I got Revolut myself, and I know there is, you can buy crypto these days on it. So I see some of it being implemented at some point. Whether ASOS is going to be doing anything about it, whether I can use my staff discount with Bitcoin yet, I don't know. So it would be great, maybe. Time will tell. But I don't have any strong opinions on that.
Okay, that's fair enough. And I remember, obviously, you was talking about you learning to code, and how did you specifically go about learning to code? Did you, for this job, did you do some sort of, boot camp, online courses? Did you get any qualifications? Because obviously, let's say if you get a degree, your company looks at you and be like, you want to come out up on as a junior, you've done a degree in programming, great. But you didn't do a degree in programming. You learned it yourself. How, like, what was the exact process? Because I know I always come across people that, let's say, that have done some sort of degree or they're in some career that's, you know, earning a decent amount of money, but they want to switch. They want to get to coding, and they're like, I don't know how. Don't have a degree. That's like the main thing that they find it difficult to get their head around. Like, I don't have a programming degree. Why is someone going to hire me and pay me a good amount, like a fair amount of money for as a programmer? Like, so what was that process like for you?
I can. You're asking how was that process for me? I can only speak from my experience. So I've mentioned earlier in the podcast that I've kind of just tried to pick up things and languages to automate basic tasks. So, for example, when I learned Linux, I've tried to just navigate using the terminal. Then I picked up version control for that one internship, and I've started to add tools to my stack one by one. Essentially by just practicing and seeing what can I do with it. Um, if I were to go back and do it again, I think I would, expose more of that to the public, do things like GitHub more often, whatnot. But following that period of university, when I went to research at Queen's, um, I essentially was a glorified data scientist. So I would be coding on a daily basis, processing data, writing data pipelines, and being involved in that side of things. And my master's was also in hydrocode simulations, so writing hydrocodes effectively to solve physical simulations. So for me, that process was how to say this, consistent through the time. It was a long process, but yeah, there was always some level of exposure to it. And as I joined ASOS, or rather before it would be a Short Skills Academy, we were, given another 10 weeks of training on top of everything else I had learned before and was able to utilize. So from that perspective, because I didn't come from the traditional, I'll hand you my CV, you can interview me, give me a programming task, do me 3 interviews, and maybe I'll get an offer. Granted that I came from this rather unique path, uh, that process was slightly different with a bootcamp and former experience. So uh, that's the best answer I can give you. Really, it's exposure. I think exposure to.
Exposure, yeah. Oh, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Did you have any pushback from companies and ASOS because you didn't have a degree? Because it's a bit different if, let's say, you don't have a degree, you've somehow done a bunch of programming jobs, and you're on your fifth one or your fifth role. Because they'll just look, okay, you've got programming experience in the industry, but because this was your first one, did they say, where's your degree? Like, was there any, hesitation as a result?
Um, I would say no. There was definitely no hesitation on when I first joined ASOS. So again, mentioning about the Shared Skills Academy, vast majority of people had no uh, background in coding at all. I was privileged enough, so to say, that I had any form of experience of coding before, and years of it, at least doing data science and, um, you know, writing simple SQL queries and knowing version control. But a lot of people didn't even have that when they initially joined this Assured Skills Academy. So I didn't see any pushback, and in light of this employment program, there wasn't any pushback that I've noticed. From again, from my perspective, in role, none of it mattered because we all joined. All of the graduates of this program joined us juniors essentially, and were basically implemented into the teams with the respective, other developers that have been doing this for quite a while. So none of it made any difference at the end of the day. So to summarize and to answer that question of yours, I haven't seen any pushback. I haven't experienced it, and just full disclaimer: when I applied to ASOS, that was essentially the only job I applied for, and somehow, one way or another, I've managed to get that.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to hear that there wasn't, pushback because there's people like us saying that want to make that shift, whether it's from one technical role to a programming role, a non-technical role to a programming role, and to know that they're more judging you based on, obviously, it's based on your experience, but they're judging you more on your skills and less the fact that you got a piece of paper with your name on it after 3-4 years. That's good to hear.
Well, you know what? You've asked a lot about, like, not how, or rather, you outlined the differences between not having a computing degree or computer science degree, and not having a physics degree. But by the end of the day, a lot of those skills are very transferable, right? Back when I was still studying physics and then worked as a researcher, you still needed communication skills. You still needed to, say, version control your code whenever you're writing, things to process your data, right? If you're writing some Python scripts to process your astronomical data, you still needed that kind of version controlling, for example, and being able to test your code. So a lot of those skills are transferable, and I would personally not say that a computer science degree is be all and end all. Far from it. Especially in light of some of my colleagues that came with absolutely zero experience, and they're still able to pull out value and develop features on a daily basis.
Okay. And what would be your biggest regret as a developer?
So I say I wouldn't call myself a developer. Right? I'm an infrastructure engineer, ultimately a platform engineer. So could you define what kind of regrets?
I mean, just anything. Like, it could be a regret that, I mean, if you, it doesn't sound like it, but if you regret becoming, so I just use the word engineer. So you regret becoming an engineer, or you feel like if you, I feel like I know the answer to this one, but like if you feel like you should have done a degree, or you should have maybe gone into this area, or if you had studied it, when you're studying it yourself slightly this way, and so it's a kind of slash regret slash tips for other engineers and advice based on your experience.
So I can definitely give advice, perhaps to avoid some of the regret. My regret for all of those years really was not exposing myself often enough. So not contributing much to open source, not showing what I was practicing or able to do publicly. I think that's something I would advise every aspiring techie to do. Show yourself out there, show what you can do, right? And don't be embarrassed about it. I certainly don't write production level code, since again I deal mostly with infrastructure, pipelines, and things like that. So don't be afraid to showcase that. I think that would be one of biggest advices I would have for anyone, especially if they, trying to change their career.
Okay, it's good stuff. And I've got some more fun generic questions now,
Sure.
non-technical ones. Would you rather run a 10-person company or a 1,000-person company, and why?
Um, I would be leaning towards a 10-person company. I guess for the cultural aspect, so to bond people over. Now, one could argue if you're running a 10-person company successfully, you're going to grow and you will eventually grow, right? If there's nothing impeding you, you'll eventually grow to a 1,000-person company. So, um, and I guess everyone would start with a 10-person company or 1-person company and then grow eventually. So I would say, yeah, I would rather have a smaller company, as long as there is some tangible impact, and try to essentially manage that at first and grow, um, say as a director, right? Or say a platform lead or something along those lines.
Okay. And obviously, yes, I mean, I do agree that if nothing really impedes, if you're doing well, you do, grow. But you can get to a point where you just think, you know what, it's grown big enough that I don't want to continue anymore. Could sell it or have somebody else take the reins, and you just have, take a step back. But you're right. If you're running a 10-person company and it's doing well, it is inevitably going to grow as well.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
would you rather have £5 million up front or half a million a year for the rest of your life, and why?
I mean, that's fairly obvious. Half a million per. I would say it's fairly obvious. Half a million.
I mean, I get a lot of different answers. I mean,
You do? Do you?
yeah, I can see, 5 million or half a million, but yeah, I do get people that say, one or the other, like all the time. Actually, I hear your reasoning first for half a million, and then I'll, give you some of the reasons that people say one or the other.
You know what? I might want to step back from some of this. From some of this. Depending how inflation goes, is that the answer? Will be one answer or the other. Like if the inflation continues at the current rate, or depending on what the pound does, or at least in the UK, what the pound does over the next few years. And I guess there is an argument, yeah, I'd rather have something up front and invest in gold or Bitcoin, whatever you want to invest in. But yeah, I guess given current circumstances, and they're highly dependent right now on what the economy does, half a million a year, I guess you're gonna have some good counter arguments for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's less counter arguments. I mean, technically, it's a counter argument. So, some people well, say the obvious one. I've said I'd rather take the 5 million up front. They feel confident that they could invest it, and because it would take you 10 years to make 5 million, for 500,000 a year. So they feel confident enough that within those 10 years they could do something with the 5 million, that they bring in at least 500,000 or more, and they've been able to have access to it and enjoy it up front. Then I've heard people say they rob off 500,000 and they've just said they don't trust themselves, and that if they blow the 500,000, they'll just get another one next year. Whereas they've said if they have 5 million, they'll probably, because they just don't manage money well, and they'll probably just spend that. And so they don't like the idea of having it all in one go, and then them having the responsibility of maintaining it. So those are probably the two or three main arguments for either one or the other. And obviously you was talking about inflation. Yes, inflation is high in UK. Yes, it doesn't look like it's calming down anytime soon, but I don't think it's going to get to a point where 500,000 in 10 years is barely going to get you anything. Yes, it'll get you less, but I don't think it's going to be to the point where you think, oh, 500,000 is nothing.
No, no, obviously, like we're not Zimbabwe for crying out
No,
loud.
no, yeah. I was over in Egypt for the holidays, and I was talking to a guy there, and he was saying it's so bad, the inflation there, that every week they go shopping, there's the price of stuff's just going up. It's not up and down, so it's just going up. He says something could be 100 Egyptian pounds today. Next week could be like 110, 115. The week after it could be like 120, 125, and it's nothing crazy like that. So yes, electricity bills have gone up. Yes, the cost of items. I remember I was talking to my wife that I remember the Hovis loaf was about £1 a year ago in most places, and now it's like £1.50 or something. And so yeah, it has gone up 50p
Yes.
or 50%, but everything hasn't gone up 50%. And I don't think next year we're gonna have it hit £2. I don't think like that's gonna happen. So 500,000 is still a good, reasonable amount to have. I like the idea from my perspective. I like the idea of both. 5 million is nice because you can start really making good moves with it. Let's say from an investment perspective, straight away. You can start doing stuff that the 500,000 just doesn't let you. But again, with the 500,000, it if you're controlled, but being crazy, but in a controlled way, you could blow that 500,000 for 1 or 2 years, learn a bunch of stuff, and act in a way where you know that after 2 or 3 years you're still going to get 500,000 every year. So you could basically learn a bunch of lessons, and if you happen to fail, it's not the end of the world. So that's what I like about the 500,000, for the rest of your life. But actually, the another thing that people have said is they asked, "Can this be passed down to their kids?" And I said, "No, it's down to you. So, however long you live." And then they said it depends on my age, because they said if I'm old, then 500,000 does not
Yes.
make much sense, because if I'm 90, chances of me getting to a point where I've got 5 million. Then when you factor in inflation, probably 15, 20 years, it's unlikely. They said I'd rather have the 5 million. So yeah, that was another. I think there's only one person that said that, but that was another viewpoint that they took, depending on age. They said,
Like, it is a multifaceted problem. You got the age, you got inflation, you got what do you invest in the first place.
"Yeah,
Ton of
are
questions.
you are you even interested in investing? Because if you have no interest in going down that route, then the half a
Mm,
million might be better for you, because you're going to keep getting it. Whereas the 5 million, if you have no inclination, no desire to learn, to invest, to risk it like that, then yeah, 5 million is great for investing. But if you don't want to do that, then all you've got is 5 million.
Sure, no, I mean, it depends on forms of investment. I would imagine as well. Like,
Oh yeah,
do you
for
want to
sure.
buy real estate or do you want to blow it on NFTs? Very two different investments. You could put the same level of money on both. I think I know which one I would personally invest in. But, yeah,
I think if you let's say you got the 5 million, or even half the 500,000 a year, you could put some into NFT. But I just wouldn't put all of it in there. I'll put maybe 10, 20, 50,000 into it, and then put the other amount into, like you were saying, property, into stocks, especially something a bit more long term and stable like S&P 500, something like that would be better. All of it in on NFT. Because imagine that. Imagine if you got the 5 million, you hear about NFTs and you think, oh my god, I'm gonna put 5 million in. It's gonna become 50 in a few months. You buy a bored ape, and it's worth £1,000 after 6 months. Oh,
I
how
mean,
bad
sure,
would you
we
feel?
can fantasize about theoretical investment returns, but you could also lose it all, right? That's the second side of it. I would not be as inclined to choose perhaps more risk prone investments and just go with, like, say, real estate property. Say 500,000, you could buy an apartment, for example. Say uh, well, anywhere but London, essentially,
Yeah.
at least in the UK, and buy that once a year. Has its ethical issues, I would imagine, but I guess that would be my path in this hypothetical scenario, something along
Okay.
those lines.
You mentioned it has its ethical issues. Like, do you want to touch on that a bit more? What do you mean
Um,
exactly?
s- so, if I know my history of the UK, well, there has been a period around 70s or 80s where a lot of council estate were sold off to private landlords.
Yes,
Suddenly, there's a lot of housing shortages, and especially these days, the prices of properties have skyrocketed.
they
Look
have.
at the
Yes.
last 10 years. We are now even in a medium city like Belfast, where I'm currently in. Uh, we are looking at about 200,000 just to get us an apartment somewhere in the city. Is it achievable with kind of, say, graduate salaries, for example, for most of people? I'm not sure. But I suppose there is an ethical issue, whether a person should have 10 houses in the first place. That is political and quite heavy, so I don't want to continue down that route. But I'm sure there are good arguments for and against this.
Okay. So yeah, I think that's fair enough. Obviously, a lot of council homes were sold off to private landlords. I think ultimately, yeah, they were sold off to private landlords, but then that just, yes, it doesn't go to people that are on the list for a council place. It'll be people that are mainly paying for the properties themselves fully. Let's say somebody who's working, but ultimately, the my understanding from my research is that it's the reason the property prices are so high, the demand is far outweighing the supply. Have you heard of the Barker report?
No, I have not.
Yeah, so that was a review that was done in 2004, if I'm correct,
Mhm.
and that basically came to the conclusion that I think 200 or 250,000 homes need to be built every single year to meet demand. The amount of people that want more houses. Since then, and it's been almost 20 years, not one year have as a whole, whether it's been government or private landlords or real estate developers combined, ever hit that 200 or 250,000. Can't remember the exact number. It's either 2 or 250. Goal of houses per year. I think it's averaged about 110, 120. Houses per year. So not only have they
Yeah.
not meet that, they've had a shortfall. So they're the shortfall of like a million or like several million homes, and then it's getting worse because there needs more and more houses to be built. So ultimately, I think government, one of the things they could do, and this is a very controversial one for the average person, especially when
Mhm.
they're not earning that much money, but is to make it easier for people that are looking to build homes to build homes, either whether that's tax incentives, whether that's reduction in certain goods for import and export to make it easier to get, whether that's to do with planning permission, whatever it is. If they made it easier, I'm sure there will be an influx of property, coming in, new property coming in. and new conversions. So yes, the council stuff, the selling to private landlord didn't help, but I think ultimately there's just not enough homes being built, and I don't think we can expect the government to pick up that shortfall of over 100,000 homes on average a year. They're just not going to do that, and so it's going to fall on private developers, and I'd say the best way to do it is, uh, give them incentives, whether that's tax incentives. Because I know in America there's a lot more tax incentives with let's say if you're earning income in some sort of company to invest it and to roll it from one property into another. In the UK, the incentives aren't quite there compared to the US. It's a lot harder to do, and there's just not that much there, which is a shame. The controversial one, because I know a lot of people will say, "Oh, landlords are greedy, etc., etc."
It's easy to throw partisan and polarizing thoughts over. I guess from my perspective is that even if private development, you're still going to need people to build it.
Yes.
Um, and it's not necessarily easy to get migrant workers these days as well. With some of the policies introduced over the last few years, say the point system, for example, you now need job offers in order to come in and build, to become a so-called low-skilled worker. But putting immigration aside, I guess there is an argument to be made that the government should be expected to do it, but whether they can, that's another story. And whether this government can do anything, that's again a topic for another podcast.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is just my opinion on it, but it kind of gonna sound like a conspiracy. But I feel
Mhm.
like because of the low supply and the high demand, I mean, this isn't my opinion. This is just obviously fact. This part of it is that the prices are increasing. The prices are increasing, and part of it, a huge part of it, is supply and demand. I feel like it's kind of almost a, not necessarily a measure, but a way that they're showcasing either to the world or to people that the government is, oh, look at our housing market, it's booming, the prices are going up. And yes, the prices are going up, but it's not necessarily for the right reasons, and people can't, afford homes as a result compared to what they could afford 40 years ago. The similar person can't afford it now. So I kind of feel like no matter what the government says, that there's less of an incentive to resolve it, because that would either lower the prices or kind of hamper the price growth that they're getting, and that doesn't look as impressive as look, we've got homes here that are 500,000 and they were 100,000, like they say 20 years ago or something, and in London they're this amount. It kind of gives the false reality that the housing market and or as broadly the economy is growing, even though it necessarily isn't. What do you think about that?
Well, by definition, it is certainly a conspiracy, but it's a conspiracy in the same light as when our Prime Minister, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson wanted to promise, 21,000 new police officers, except we've lost about 20,000 over the number of years. So is it really 21,000 new police officers, or are we just replacing our losses? Again, debate to be made here. So I don't I don't want to form opinions on conspiracy theories when it comes to whether there is an inflated or fake value of new developments and housing. What I would say is to look at what are the stakeholders, right, and what is there to be benefited from doing that.
Okay,
Hopefully,
yeah, fair enough. Favorite board game?
I'm as a kid I used to like Risk. I guess that would be my go-to. But when was the last time I've played Risk? I would say maybe a decade ago.
Yeah. It takes a while to play.
It does. It does. Well, in the same light as Monopoly.
Yes, yes. I mean, I haven't played Risk many times. Played it a few times. I feel like every time we've played it, me and my wife and my sister, that we just don't play correctly. I feel like we just. I feel like we simplify the actual rules, and we just don't fully understand it.
Yeah, it was. Yep.
Uh,
Such as the case with like Monopoly as well. And
Yeah. I mean, are there any board games that you know of that are geared more towards developers, engineers, programmers, kind
I
of
would
thing?
love to know if there are, but
I've never
not
come
really.
across one.
No, I haven't come across one.
Okay, and what's your favorite video game if you're into video games?
Um, so I am coming back to get like PC gaming. After a while, I do it in waves. So every now and then, I would uh, spend some time after work playing games, and there will be huge breaks in between. Um, gosh, what's recently I've been playing a lot of Factorio. So factory construction game. I've been playing that with my girlfriend for some time. I don't have a specific genre I like, uh, in all honesty, these days. So used to play a lot of games like Elite Dangerous, and that was a while back before the Odyssey expansion. Um, Otherwise, no specific genre. I guess I come back to classics at some from time to time, like 7 Days to Die or Minecraft, things like that. But again, very casual these days.
Okay, are there any particular games that you're looking forward to?
Um, you know what? I haven't kept up to date. I would love to look at my Steam wish list right now. I guess I wanted to play Stalker 2, but given the situation in Ukraine, that's not coming anytime soon right now.
No.
And Blast from the Past, I guess Company of Heroes, and the other sequels coming out, Company of Heroes 3. So that's been delayed until this year, sometime this year, March, I believe. Could be wrong, but yeah, those kind of games.
Oh yeah, I remember playing Company of Heroes back in the day. Uh, I mean, I am looking forward to the new one. The graphics, for the old ones, and the gameplay for the old ones as well. It brings back fond memories.
No, very much so. Company of Heroes 1 and 2 were brilliant. I do occasionally enjoy a game of Civilization 6 specifically. So again, they take a lot of time, so there has to be an incentive. You're gonna have your friends on Discord or whatever, um, ready to spend a few hours over. So yeah,
Yeah.
it can be an effort sometimes, especially when you're done with work or you want to do something else, or you got some other work to do, like revising for your.
Yeah, and also if let's say you got an hour to kill, see if let's say watching some TV, for a lot of people scrolling on YouTube or social media, that's probably the worst
Mhm.
one. Playing some game. Obviously, it can feel like there's just that, especially when you're gonna go on the PC, there's just that barrier to entry to get into the game, and then it's like, oh, am I gonna have fun during this 1 hour? Like, am I gonna end up playing and then just being terrible at it because I haven't played it for a while, and then I'm gonna think, oh, I
Exactly.
haven't done anything in this hour that really, made me smile. I know sometimes I do feel like that.
Yeah, and sometimes you're over half. If you play with your wife or girlfriend, or again your significant other. Let's generalize here. Let's be inclusive. But with your significant other, um, then they might be busy as well. Your friends might be busy, and yeah, it can be hard to get something up, and then weekends come and go. So I see gaming these days as a way to socialize, like just to chat with people, catch up what they have done, while scrolling, building a factory in Factorio or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. And this is a question that I always love asking: does
Mhm.
money buy you happiness, and why?
Does money buy me happiness? Money buys you freedom to do whatever you want. Money can buy you devices for instant gratification. So I've kind of mentioned this in some of the previous questions. I do like building keyboards and upgrading my local setup and heck, I'm on the fancy mic for no other reason but to have one. So guilty pleasure of making your setup better, for example, and this does go on onto perhaps making purchases that, do I really need a couple of keyboards? Well, no, but it gives me some gratification, right? So does money buy me happiness? No, but it does buy experiences, and say going on a trip, right, a city break or something, and it does buy you some peace, in my opinion. So no, with an asterisk.
Okay, fair enough. And what does a good life mean to you?
Good life. Stability, I would say. We do live in rather uncertain times, and to me, specifically at least, having come from another country to live in the United Kingdom and going through the system and then educating, getting a job, having a long time partner, I think there is that element of stability, but also I wouldn't say I'm fully career oriented. I've certainly changed that mindset after COVID. Um, but what I would say is um, being able to finish your work and think that that was okay. I enjoyed today. And you have a bad day from time to time. And I had terrible days over the last few weeks, and my manager be a witness to that. But even then, on average, ending your work, seeing your significant other, and saying, terrible day, let's try tomorrow, and having that kind of stability that there is always a chance for. I think that's something very important to me. I'm not sure if that's the full meaning of life. I'm way too young to answer that. I'm still 25, so um,
Yeah, it's one of the things. It changes as you grow older. I know it's changed for me over the years. I know how I used to be about work, and I still am. But since I got married, my mindset has changed. Especially since I've had a child last year, my mindset has definitely changed, and it's again, I'm still heavily focused on work, still trying to put as many hours in as I can. But then I do think that it's for a different reason. It's the family side of things compared to just success for the sake of success.
yeah, no, I completely agree, and it's something I do reflect on quite a lot from the previous days, whether it was academia or elsewhere. Um, yeah, I don't think success is one dimensional. That's something I had to learn the hard way back in the day. I'm happy with my job. I'm really happy with what kind of responsibilities and focus I have, and I still pull. I want to think at least that I still pick up that um, be it extra tasks or giving that umph a little bit, at work and giving your best every single day, even if that day might be miserable for whatever reason it might be. But I wouldn't say that's my number one priority anymore. And yeah, as you grow older, responsibilities grow, so you have other things to worry about as well, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, I would say.
No, it isn't. Obviously, you do get more responsibilities, more things to worry about. Again, it's a bad mindset as well. Do you want to choose to worry about them, or do you want to, you know, appreciate the things that you have and think, okay, this is an opportunity either for me to grow, for me to provide, or for to do this and that. And I appreciate the things that I have compared to looking at it from a negative or some sort of negative side.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Okay, so that's all I have for Dominik. Do you have any closing words, Dominik, before we wrap up?
Uh, Closing words. Well, anyone that managed to get this far, thank you so much, and thank you for your time as well, Farhan. Guess some closing inspirational words is to not necessarily look at your background and what paper you might have, but always try to figure out what you're good at and what you're really passionate about, and try to get your foot in somewhere. If you haven't done it, try it, and I don't think you will regret it.
Okay, great advice. And again, I just want to thank you, Dominik, for coming on, taking the time to chat with me today. I'm sure everyone will enjoy this episode. Stay tuned for the next episode of FireDEV. Like, subscribe, and follow the podcast on your relevant platforms: Spotify, Apple, Google, etc. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.